I took in my niece, who was being bullied by her brother, who enjoyed the favor of her parents. I never expected my brother's family to show up on my doorstep, especially not with my niece Ella in tow. The sky was gray that day, mirroring the tension that hung in the air. It was a Saturday morning, and I was just settling into my routine, savoring the first sip of coffee, when the doorbell rang. The sound was unusually shrill, slicing through the peaceful silence of my home. Opening the door, I found my brother Mark, his wife Sandra, and their 2 kids, Jake and Ella, standing awkwardly on the porch. Mark was wearing his typical expression of suppressed irritation, while Sandra looked as if she had just bitten into a lemon. Jake stood there, his eyes scanning my house with disdain, clearly unimpressed. But it was Ella who caught my attention. Her eyes were downcast, her shoulders slumped, and she clutched a worn-out teddy bear to her chest. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Hey, Alex," Mark said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need a favor." I raised an eyebrow. Favors from Mark were never simple. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping aside to let them in. The cold wind followed them, adding to the chill I felt creeping up my spine. "We need you to take Ella for a while," Sandra blurted out, her tone sharper than she probably intended. "Just until we sort some things out." Ella's head jerked up at this, her eyes widening in what looked like a mix of hope and fear. I motioned for them to sit, trying to process the sudden request. My living room, usually a place of comfort, felt cramped with their presence. "Sort what out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated. Jake has some issues, and we think it's best if Ella stays with you for a bit." I glanced at Jake, who was now sprawled on my couch looking bored. Issues? That was an understatement. I'd heard bits and pieces about Jake's behavior from family gatherings, but I'd never seen it up close. "What kind of issues?" I pressed, my eyes narrowing. Sandra huffed, clearly impatient. "He's been having some trouble at school, and it's been affecting Ella. We just think some time apart will do them both good." I looked at Ella, who seemed to be shrinking into herself with every word. My heart ached for her. It was obvious that there was more to the story, but I didn't want to push too hard with her standing right there. "Okay," I said finally, "Ella can stay with me, but we need to talk about this more later." Mark and Sandra exchanged relieved glances. "Thank you, Alex," Mark said, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "We'll be back to check on her soon." They left almost as quickly as they had arrived, with Jake in tow, leaving Ella standing in the middle of my living room, looking lost and out of place. I kneeled down to her level, trying to offer a reassuring smile. "Hey, Ella," I said gently, "how about we get you settled in?" She nodded silently, clutching her teddy bear tighter. I led her to the guest room, which I quickly realized looked more like a storage room. Boxes were piled in the corners, and the bed was covered with an old quilt. "I'm sorry it's not much right now," I said, clearing a space for her. "We'll make it more comfortable, I promise." Ella just nodded again, her eyes darting around the room nervously. I could see the exhaustion etched on her face, and it made me furious to think of what she must have been through. Over the next few days, I tried to make my home feel like a sanctuary for Ella. We shopped for new bedding, some posters, and a few books she liked. Slowly, she started to open up. She told me about school, her friends, or lack thereof, and how Jake had made her life a living hell. "It wasn't just him, Uncle Alex," she whispered one night as we sat on the couch watching a movie. "Mom and Dad, they always take his side, no matter what he does." Her words broke my heart. It was clear that the favoritism was deeply ingrained, and Ella had borne the brunt of it for far too long. I promised her that things would be different here, that she would be safe and valued. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and skepticism, as if she wanted to believe me but was too scared to fully trust. As the days turned into weeks, I saw a change in Ella. She smiled more, laughed at my silly jokes, and even started to make friends at her new school. But the shadows of her past still lingered, and I knew it would take time for her to fully heal. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, the doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Jake standing there, looking as smug as ever. "Mom and Dad thought it would be good if I spent the weekend here," he announced, pushing past me without waiting for an invitation. Ella's face fell, and the familiar fear returned to her eyes. I knew then that this was far from over. Protecting Ella would be a battle, and I was ready to fight it. Jake's arrival brought an unsettling energy to my home. He swaggered in as if he owned the place, tossing his bag onto the couch and scanning the room with a disdainful sneer. I shot Ella a reassuring glance, but she was already retreating into herself, the confidence she'd started to build over the past weeks crumbling in an instant. "Nice place, Uncle Alex," Jake said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Bit small, don't you think?" "Make yourself at home, Jake," I replied evenly, not rising to his bait. "Just remember to be respectful." He shrugged, flopping down and grabbing the remote. Ella lingered in the doorway, her eyes darting between me and Jake. I could see the anxiety in her face, the way her hands fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. "Why don't you go set up your room, Jake?" I suggested, trying to give Ella some space. "Ella can show you where everything is." Ella's eyes widened in panic, and I immediately regretted my suggestion. "Actually, I'll show you," I corrected quickly. "Come on." I led Jake to the guest room next to Ella's, my mind racing with how to keep the peace. Jake dumped his stuff on the bed, looking around with a critical eye. "This will do," he said, his tone dismissive. "But why does Ella get a better room?" I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Ella's been here longer, Jake. Let's just make this weekend work, okay?" Jake rolled his eyes but didn't argue further. As I headed back to the living room, I caught a glimpse of Ella peeking out from her room, her eyes wide with concern. I gave her a small smile, hoping to convey that I had everything under control. Dinner that night was tense. Jake dominated the conversation, bragging about his exploits at school and his plans for the future. Ella barely touched her food, her gaze fixed on her plate. I tried to engage her, asking about her day, her classes, anything to draw her out. But Jake always found a way to interrupt, steering the conversation back to himself. "You know, Dad says I'm going to be the next big thing in sports," Jake boasted, shoveling food into his mouth. "He's already talking to scouts." "That's great, Jake," I said, forcing a smile. "But let's hear about Ella's day. How was school, Ella?" Ella looked up, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It was okay," she mumbled. "I got an A on my math test." "That's awesome, Ella!" I exclaimed, genuinely proud. "You've been working so hard." Jake snorted. "Big deal. It's just math. Try doing something that actually matters." Ella's face fell and I felt a surge of anger. "Jake, everyone has their strengths," I said firmly. "Ella's accomplishments are just as important as yours." Jake rolled his eyes again, but thankfully didn't push further. After dinner, I suggested we watch a movie, hoping to lighten the mood. Ella perked up at the idea, but Jake complained about the movie choices, finally settling on something he liked. As the movie played, I kept a close eye on both kids. Ella was curled up in the armchair, her legs tucked under her, while Jake sprawled out on the couch. Every now and then he'd make a snide comment, but for the most part he stayed quiet. Later that night I found Ella sitting on her bed, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. I knocked gently on the doorframe. "Can I come in?" She nodded, her eyes filled with a sadness that broke my heart. I sat down beside her, trying to find the right words. "I am sorry about Jake," I began. "He can be difficult." Ella shrugged, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's always like this. At home he gets everything. Mom and Dad never see how mean he is to me." Her words echoed the ones she'd whispered to me that night on the couch, and I felt a familiar surge of protectiveness. "Ella, you don't deserve to be treated like that. You're an amazing kid and you have so much to offer." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," I said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And I'm here to make sure you always remember that." The weekend dragged on. with Jake's presence casting a long shadow over our days. He continued to belittle Ella, finding every opportunity to remind her of her supposed inferiority. I intervened as much as I could, but I knew my words could only do so much. The scars of years of mistreatment wouldn't heal overnight. On Sunday evening, as I drove Jake back home, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and dread. I was relieved to have my home return to the peaceful refuge it had become for Ella, but I dreaded the inevitable fallout from my brother and Sandra. "Thanks for the ride, Uncle Alex," Jake said as we pulled up to their house. "I guess it wasn't so bad staying with you." I forced a smile. "Glad to hear it, Jake. Remember what we talked about, okay?" He nodded, though I doubted my words had made much of an impact. As he got out of the car, I watched him saunter up the driveway, his swagger returning with every step. My heart ached for Ella, knowing she'd face the brunt of his arrogance when he was back home. When I returned, I found Ella waiting anxiously in the living room. Her face lit up when she saw me, and I couldn't help but smile. "Hey, kiddo, how about some ice cream to celebrate Jake going home?" She laughed, a sound that warmed my heart. "Yes, please." As we sat together enjoying our ice cream, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I would do everything in my power to protect Ella, to give her the life she deserved. And I would start by confronting my brother and Sandra, no matter how difficult that conversation might be. The morning after Jake left, the house felt like it could finally breathe again. Ella seemed more relaxed, her eyes brighter, and her smile coming more easily. I was determined to make her feel as safe and loved as possible. "Ella, how about we go out today?" I suggested over breakfast. "We can do anything you want, maybe a trip to the bookstore or a movie." Her face lit up at the mention of the bookstore. "Can we go to that big one downtown, the one with the cafe?" "Absolutely," I said, relieved to see her excited. "We'll make a day of it." At the bookstore, Ella wandered through the aisles, her eyes wide with wonder. She picked out a few books, and we found a cozy corner in the cafe to sit and read. As she immersed herself in a fantasy novel, I marveled at how different she seemed without Jake's oppressive presence. After a while, I put down my own book and watched her. "You know, Ella, you're really strong. Everything you've been through, it hasn't broken you." She looked up, surprised. "Really? Sometimes I feel so weak." I shook my head. "You're anything but weak. It takes a lot of strength to endure what you have and still be as kind and resilient as you are." She smiled shyly, returning to her book. The day felt like a small victory, a step towards healing. Over the next few weeks, I focused on creating a stable routine for Ella. I enrolled her in a new school, closer to my house, and signed her up for art classes, something she had always been passionate about but never had the chance to pursue. Seeing her slowly regain her confidence was incredibly rewarding. One evening after dinner, we were sitting in the living room when Ella hesitated before speaking. "Uncle Alex, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Ella. What's on your mind?" She fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, a habit I recognized as a sign of her nervousness. "Why do you think Mom and Dad always favor Jake? Why don't they care about me the same way?" Her question hit me hard. I'd often wondered the same thing but had never found a satisfactory answer. "Ella, sometimes people have their own issues and insecurities that make them act in ways that hurt others. It has nothing to do with you or your worth." "But it feels like it's my fault," she said softly. "Like I'm not good enough." I moved closer, taking her hands in mine. "Ella, listen to me. You are more than good enough. Your parents' favoritism says more about them than it does about you. You deserve to be loved and treated with respect, just as much as Jake or anyone else." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she leaned into me, seeking comfort. I held her, my heart breaking for the pain she carried. I made a silent vow to always be there for her, to make sure she knew she was valued. As Ella settled into her new school, I noticed more positive changes. She made friends, joined a study group, and even started participating in school events. The transformation was incredible to witness, and it made me more determined to ensure she stayed on this path. One Saturday, I took Ella to her art class, and while she was busy creating, I met with a lawyer to discuss the possibility of gaining legal guardianship. I wanted to make sure I could protect her from being sent back to the toxic environment she came from. The lawyer, Mrs. Thompson, was kind and understanding. She listened carefully to my concerns and explained the process. "It's not going to be easy, Alex. Your brother and his wife will have to agree, or there will need to be evidence of neglect or abuse." I nodded, my resolve firm. "I just want to give Ella the life she deserves." "We'll do everything we can," Mrs. Thompson assured me. "But be prepared for a fight. Custody battles can get messy." As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a mix of hope and apprehension. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but I was ready to fight for Ella's happiness. That evening I told Ella about my meeting with the lawyer. Her eyes widened with surprise. "You'd really do that for me?" "Of course," I said, smiling. "You're family, Ella, and family looks out for each other." She hugged me tightly, and I felt a surge of warmth. "Thank you, Uncle Alex. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're never going to have to find out," I promised. "We'll get through this together." The weeks turned into months, and Ella continued to flourish. She won an art competition at school, her paintings reflecting a newfound confidence and joy. I hung her winning piece in the living room, a constant reminder of her strength and resilience. One day, as we were preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Mark standing there, looking more worn and frazzled than I'd ever seen him. "Alex, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "It's about Ella." I felt a knot of anxiety form in my stomach. "What is it, Mark? What's going on?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "Sandra and we've been talking. We realized we've made some mistakes. We want to make things right with Ella." I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part was wary of his sudden change of heart. "What do you mean, make things right?" "We want to start family counseling," he explained. "We know we've hurt Ella, and we want to fix things. But we need your help." I felt a mix of emotions: hope, skepticism, and protectiveness for Ella. "Mark, this isn't just about you and Sandra making amends. It's about what's best for Ella, and right now she needs stability." "I know," he admitted, "but we want to be part of her life again. We want to earn her trust." I took a deep breath, considering his words. "I'll talk to Ella. If she's open to it, we can try family counseling. But if she doesn't want to, you need to respect that." Mark nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Alex. We just want a chance to make things right." That evening I sat down with Ella and told her about Mark's visit. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of hope and fear flickering in her eyes. "What do you think, Ella? Do you want to give them a chance?" She was silent for a long time, thinking it over. "I'll try," she said finally, "but only if they really mean it. I can't go through more broken promises." I hugged her, proud of her bravery. "We'll take it one step at a time, and I'll be right here with you." The journey towards reconciliation would be long and difficult, but I was hopeful. Ella had shown incredible strength and resilience, and I was determined to support her every step of the way. Family counseling began with cautious optimism. Ella was hesitant, but she agreed to attend the sessions, provided I was there with her. Mark and Sandra seemed genuinely remorseful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. Trust would be hard-earned, and I was prepared for the long haul. One Friday evening, as we were wrapping up dinner, the phone rang. It was Mark, sounding unusually chipper. "Hey, Alex, we were thinking Jake should spend the weekend with you guys again. You know, for family bonding." My grip tightened on the phone. "Is that a good idea, Mark? Ella's still healing and Jake can be difficult." "We've been talking to him," Mark insisted. "He understands he needs to treat Ella better. Besides, it's important for them to rebuild their relationship." I sighed, glancing at Ella, who was quietly washing the dishes. "All right, but if he causes any trouble, he's going back immediately." "Thanks, Alex. This means a lot to us." I hung up, my stomach knotting with unease. Ella, Jake's coming over for the weekend. Her face paled and she set down the dish she was holding. Do I have to see him? I walked over and put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Well, keep an eye on him. If he steps out of line, hell be gone. You have my word. The next evening, Jake arrived with his usual swagger, but there was a hint of something different, a flicker of nervousness, perhaps. He greeted us with a nonchalant wave and dumped his bag in the hallway. Hey, Ella, he said, trying to sound casual. How's it going? Ella gave a small nod, clearly uncomfortable. Hi, Jake. I decided to break the tension. Why don't we watch a movie? Something we can all enjoy. We settled on a family-friendly comedy, hoping to lighten the mood. Ella and I took the couch, while Jake sprawled out in the armchair. The movie played, but the real drama was in the room. Jake's occasional glances at Ella were filled with a mix of guilt and confusion, while Ella kept her focus firmly on the screen. After the movie, I suggested we play a board game. Jake groaned, but Ella's eyes lit up slightly. We picked an old favorite, and for a while it felt like we were making progress. Jake tried to be civil, and Ella started to relax, her competitive spirit shining through. But as the night wore on, the old dynamics began to resurface. Jake couldn't resist making snide comments, and Ella's initial confidence began to waver. I stepped in whenever I could, but it was clear that years of ingrained behavior wouldn't change overnight. The next morning, I found Ella sitting alone at the kitchen table, her breakfast untouched. Hey, kiddo. Everything okay? She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Just nervous about today. Jake said he wants to hang out, but I don't know if I can trust him. I sat down beside her, taking her hand. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. If you feel uncomfortable, you come to me right away, okay? She nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. Okay. Jake joined us soon after, grumbling about the early hour. I suggested we all go to the park, hoping a change of scenery might help. Ella agreed reluctantly, while Jake seemed indifferent. At the park, Ella found solace in the swings, her face lighting up as she soared through the air. Jake hung back, watching her with an unreadable expression. I decided to give them some space, sitting on a nearby bench where I could keep an eye on them. After a while, Jake approached Ella. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw the tension in Ella's posture. She looked torn between wanting to give him a chance and protecting herself from more hurt. Jake seemed to be making an effort, though awkwardly. When we returned home, I could see the strain had taken its toll on Ella. She retreated to her room and I gave her space, knowing she needed time to process everything. Jake, meanwhile, flopped onto the couch, looking exhausted. That went well, he muttered sarcastically. I sat down across from him, keeping my tone calm. Jake, you need to understand something. Ella's been through a lot because of you. It won't be easy for her to trust you again. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I know. I messed up, okay? I don't know how to fix it. By being patient and showing her that you've changed, I said firmly. Actions speak louder than words. The rest of the weekend was a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments of tentative bonding, like when Jake and Ella worked together on a puzzle or shared a rare laugh over a funny YouTube video. But there were also setbacks, like when Jake's temper flared and he lashed out with hurtful comments, undoing any progress they had made. Sunday evening came and it was time to take Jake home. As we drove, the silence was heavy with unspoken words. I could see the conflict in Jake's eyes, a mix of regret and frustration. Jake, I know this isn't easy for you either, I said gently. But if you really want to make things right with Ella, you have to keep trying. She needs to see that you mean it. He nodded, staring out the window. I'll try, Uncle Alex. I really will. When I returned home, Ella was waiting anxiously in the living room. Is he gone? Yes, he's gone, I assured her, sitting down beside her. How do you feel? She sighed, leaning her head on my shoulder. It's hard. I want to believe he's changed, but it's scary." "I understand," I said softly, "and it's okay to take your time. Healing takes time." That night, as I tucked Ella into bed, she looked up at me with those big, hopeful eyes. "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't know what normal is, but I do know that we'll find a new normal, one where you're happy and safe." She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, Uncle Alex, for everything." "Always, Ella," I said, kissing her forehead. "Good night." As I left her room, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and hope. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but we were making progress. One step at a time, one day at a time, we would get through this together. The following week, life seemed to settle into a fragile routine. Ella continued to flourish at her new school, and our evenings were filled with laughter and light-hearted moments. However, the weekend with Jake had left its mark, and I could see the shadows of doubt still lingering in her eyes. One afternoon, I received a call from the family counselor, Dr. Peterson. "Alex, I'd like to schedule a session with just you and Mark. I think it's important to address some underlying issues between the two of you." I agreed, knowing it was necessary. The following day, I met Mark at Dr. Peterson's office. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than I'd remembered. "Thank you both for coming," Dr. Peterson began, her voice calm and reassuring. "I've been working with Mark and Sandra, and I believe it's crucial for us to address the dynamics between the two of you, especially concerning Ella and Jake." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I know I've made mistakes, Alex, but we're trying to make things right." I nodded, but my frustration simmered beneath the surface. "Mark, it's not just about making things right now. It's about understanding the damage that's been done and preventing it from happening again." Dr. Peterson leaned forward. "Mark, can you share why you and Sandra have shown such favoritism towards Jake?" Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's complicated, Jake. He was always a difficult child. Sandra and we felt overwhelmed. He demanded so much attention, and we lost sight of Ella." His words stung, but I held back my anger. "Ella is your daughter too, Mark. She needed you, and you ignored her." "I know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I know we failed her, but we're trying to change. That's why we want family counseling, to rebuild our relationship with her." Dr. Peterson nodded. "Acknowledging your mistakes is the first step, but you must also understand the impact of your actions. Ella has suffered deeply, and it will take time for her to heal." Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. "Can you forgive us, Alex? Can you help us make things right with Ella?" I took a deep breath, considering his plea. "It's not about my forgiveness, Mark. It's about earning Ella's trust. If you truly want to change, he'll support you. But this has to be about her." "Thank you," he said, relief washing over his face. "Well, do whatever it takes." The session ended on a hopeful note, but I knew the real work was just beginning. Later that evening, I sat down with Ella and shared the conversation with her. "They want to change, Ella. They're willing to work hard to earn your trust back." She listened quietly, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think they really mean it?" "I think they're trying," I said honestly. "But it's up to you. You have the right to set your own boundaries and take your time." Ella nodded, a mix of hope and caution in her eyes. "I'll give them a chance, but I won't let them hurt me again." I hugged her, proud of her strength. "That's all anyone can ask. You're incredibly brave, Ella." The following weeks were a whirlwind of counseling sessions and difficult conversations. Mark and Sandra showed genuine remorse, and slowly Ella began to open up. She shared her feelings, her fears, and her hopes for the future. It was a painful process, but it was also cathartic. One evening, as we were having dinner, Ella surprised me with a question. "Uncle Alex, do you think we can visit Mom and Dad this weekend? I want to see if they've really changed." I paused, taken aback. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" She nodded, determination in her eyes. "I need to know if they mean what they say." All right, I agreed. We'll go together. That Saturday we drove to Mark and Sandra's house. Ella was quiet during the ride, her hands nervously picking at the hem of her shirt. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Remember, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. We'll take it one step at a time. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a wave of nostalgia and apprehension. The house looked the same, but everything inside felt different. Mark and Sandra greeted us at the door, their smiles genuine but tinged with anxiety. "Ella, it's so good to see you," Sandra said, her voice trembling. "Hi, Mom," Ella replied softly. Mark stepped forward, looking awkward and uncertain. "Hey, sweetheart, we've missed you." Ella gave a small nod, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. We went inside, and the atmosphere was tense, each of us feeling the weight of the past. We sat in the living room, and I noticed the changes. Photos of Ella were now prominently displayed alongside Jake's, a small but significant gesture. We made small talk, trying to ease the tension, but it was clear that the real conversation was yet to come. After a while, Ella took a deep breath and spoke. "Why did you always favor Jake? Why didn't you see what he was doing to me?" Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "Ella, we were wrong. We were so focused on Jake's needs that we neglected yours. We let you down and we're so sorry." Mark nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought we were doing what was best, but we were blind to the damage we were causing. We want to make it right, if you'll let us." Ella looked at them, her expression a mix of sadness and hope. "I want to believe you, but it's going to take time, and I need you to understand that things can't just go back to the way they were." Sandra reached out, her hand trembling. "We understand, Ella. We're here to support you, however you need." The rest of the visit was filled with tentative steps towards reconciliation. Ella shared more about her life with me, her achievements at school, and her dreams for the future. Mark and Sandra listened attentively, their pride and regret evident. As we left, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wouldn't be easy, but it felt like we were moving in the right direction. Back home, Ella seemed lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "How do you feel?" I asked as we settled on the couch. "Better," she admitted. "It's going to take time, but I think they really want to change." "I'm proud of you, Ella. You've shown so much courage." She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Uncle Alex. I couldn't have done it without you." That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the journey we'd been on. There were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, I felt a sense of optimism. We were building a new normal, one filled with love, trust, and healing. Ella continued to flourish at school, excelling in her classes and making friends who valued and supported her. Her artwork was being noticed, and she was even asked to contribute to a mural project at school, something that made her eyes light up with excitement. One Friday evening, as we were finishing dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "Can we come over? We have something important to discuss." I hesitated before responding. "Sure. Come by in an hour." Ella looked up from her plate, noticing my concerned expression. "Is everything okay?" "Mark and Sandra want to talk. They didn't say what it's about, but it sounds important." An hour later, Mark and Sandra arrived, looking more anxious than usual. We settled in the living room, the air thick with anticipation. Ella sat close to me, her hand gripping mine tightly. "Alex? Ella?" Mark began, his voice shaky. "We've been doing a lot of thinking and talking. We want to make things right, and part of that is acknowledging that we've failed to provide a safe and loving environment for Ella." Sandra nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "We love you, Ella, and we want what's best for you. That's why we've decided to support Alex's request for legal guardianship." Ella's eyes widened in surprise. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sandra said, her voice trembling, "that Alex will have the legal right to take care of you. You'll live with him, and he'll make decisions about your well-being. We think it's the best way for you to heal and be happy." I felt a surge of emotion. This was the turning point we'd been waiting for. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, looking directly at Mark. "We are," he confirmed. "We realize now that we need to take a step back and let you thrive in a stable, loving environment." Ella's grip on my hand tightened, and I could see the mix of emotions in her eyes: relief, happiness, and a touch of uncertainty. "Thank you," she whispered. The next steps involved meeting with the lawyer, filing the necessary paperwork, and preparing for the legal process. It was a daunting task, but knowing that Mark and Sandra were on board made it feel achievable. Later that night, as I tucked Ella into bed, she looked up at me with a hopeful smile. "Do you really think this will work out, Uncle Alex?" "I do," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We're building a new future, one step at a time." She hugged me tightly, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." As I left her room, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and hope. The turning point had arrived, and we were ready to embrace it with open hearts. The weeks following Mark and Sandra's decision were a whirlwind of legalities, meetings, and preparations. Mrs. Thompson, our lawyer, guided us through each step, ensuring that everything was in order for the guardianship process. Despite the complexities, the support from Mark and Sandra made it smoother than I had anticipated. Ella adapted to the changes with remarkable resilience. She threw herself into her mural project, spending hours sketching, painting, and bringing her vision to life. Seeing her so engrossed and passionate about something filled me with pride. One sunny Saturday, we decided to visit the park where Ella had found solace on the swings. This time, we brought a picnic, intending to spend a carefree day outdoors. Ella invited a couple of her new friends, and their laughter and playful energy were infectious. As the kids ran around, I found a moment to sit and reflect. Ella's growth was astounding. She was no longer the timid, anxious girl who had arrived at my doorstep. She was blossoming into a confident, creative, and joyful young person. During our picnic, Ella's friends, Mia and Sophia, chatted excitedly about the upcoming school talent show. "Ella's going to perform her poem," Mia announced proudly. "Really?" I asked, looking at Ella with surprise. "You didn't tell me." Ella blushed, smiling shyly. "I wanted it to be a surprise. I've been working on it for a while." "Can I hear it?" I asked, genuinely curious. Ella hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but it's still a work in progress." She stood up, taking a deep breath, and began reciting her poem. Her voice was clear and strong, filled with emotion. The words spoke of resilience, hope, and finding one's strength despite adversity. As she finished, her friends clapped enthusiastically, and I felt a lump in my throat. "That was beautiful, Ella," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Ella beamed, her eyes shining with happiness. "Thank you, Uncle Alex. It means a lot." That evening, after we returned home, we received a call from Mrs. Thompson. "I have great news," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "The court has approved the guardianship. Ella is officially under your care, Alex." Ella overheard and ran to my side, her eyes wide with anticipation. "What did she say?" "We did it, Ella," I said, scooping her up in a hug. "You're officially staying with me." Tears of joy streamed down her face as she hugged me tightly. "I can't believe it. This is the best news ever." That night, we celebrated with a special dinner, just the two of us. We talked about the future, our dreams, and all the possibilities that lay ahead. Ella's happiness was palpable, and it filled me with a sense of fulfillment and purpose. As I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with a contented smile. "Thank you, Uncle Alex. You've given me a new beginning." "You deserve it, Ella," I said, kissing her forehead. "Here's to many more happy memories together." The journey had been long and arduous, but we had reached a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. The weeks following the guardianship approval felt like a fresh start. Ella and I settled into a comfortable routine, one that was filled with laughter, mutual respect, and a deepening bond. Our home was a sanctuary where she could continue to heal and thrive. The family counseling sessions with Mark and Sandra also continued. Though difficult at times, they were essential for rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Ella was brave, voicing her feelings and setting boundaries. Mark and Sandra listened, their remorse evident in every session. One afternoon, as Ella and I worked on a new art project together, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Uncle Alex, do you think I should invite Mom and Dad to the talent show?" I paused, considering her question. "Do you want them there?" She nodded slowly. "I think so. I want them to see how much I've grown and what I'm capable of." "Then let's invite them," I said, squeezing her hand. "This is your moment, and you deserve to have everyone who loves you there to support you." The night of the talent show arrived, and the auditorium buzzed with excitement. Ella was nervous but determined. I sat in the front row, flanked by Mark and Sandra, who looked equally anxious. Ella's friends, Mia and Sophia, were also there, cheering her on. As Ella took the stage, I felt a surge of pride. She stood tall, her presence commanding the attention of the entire audience. She began reciting her poem, and her voice was clear and strong, filled with the same emotion that had moved me so deeply before. Her words painted a vivid picture of her journey, the pain, the struggle, and ultimately the triumph. The audience was silent, hanging on to every word. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Ella's face lit up with a radiant smile as she took a deep bow. Backstage, I found Ella beaming with joy. "You were amazing, Ella," I said, hugging her tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Mark and Sandra approached, their eyes filled with tears. "Ella, that was incredible," Sandra said, her voice trembling. "We're so proud of you." Mark nodded, his voice choked with emotion. "You've grown into an amazing young woman, Ella. We're sorry for everything and grateful for this chance to be here with you." Ella smiled, a mix of relief and happiness in her eyes. "Thank you, Mom, Dad. I'm glad you're here." The rest of the evening was a celebration. We went out for ice cream, laughing and reminiscing about the past while looking forward to the future. There was a sense of closure, a feeling that we were finally moving towards a healthier, happier dynamic. As we settled back into our routine, I saw even more positive changes in Ella. She was more confident, more open, and more at peace with herself. The scars of her past were still there, but they were healing, and she was stronger for it. One sunny afternoon, as we sat on the porch, Ella turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Uncle Alex, do you think things will keep getting better?" I smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I do, Ella. We've come a long way and we'll keep moving forward together." She nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The journey had been long and challenging, but it was also filled with growth, love, and countless moments of joy. As we looked ahead to the future, I knew that we would face it together, stronger than ever. "Thank you, Uncle Alex," Ella said softly, "for everything." "Always, Ella," I replied, hugging her tightly. "Always." And so our story continued, with a new beginning that was bright and filled with promise. We had faced the storm and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever life had in store for us. The future was ours, and we would make the most of every moment, together. Thank you all for following our journey. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, but your support has meant the world to us. Have you ever experienced a similar family dynamic? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments. Let's continue to support each other through life's ups and downs.